Hi, welcome to Lance Lit and Learn. This is my new YouTube channel, so be sure to like, subscribe, and share with others. So the point, the basis, the mission of this channel, if you will, is sharing literary analysis, my literary analysis of different types of fiction throughout my teaching career and my career as a student that I've encountered. So with this channel, I hope to spread the passion, inspire future teachers or students of literature, whether it's studying to go into English as a major or just using this as a fuel to drive your hobbies or interests in continuing to read. So I've been teaching for over 20 years. Many former students from during that time period. I've spent a lot of my time teaching AP English language and composition, and most recently AP English literature and composition. So and teaching both aspects of literary analysis, well, literary and rhetorical analysis, have given me a lot of depth and breadth in my understanding of different types of literature. Not necessarily, mastery, if you will, but a good basis. So anyway, the point of this channel, like I said, is to hopefully spread that passion, that knowledge, and gain insight and knowledge from viewers. So like you would in a student teacher type setting. So anyway, and throughout the channel, I hope to examine different types of literature, novels for the most part, short stories, excerpts from pieces, and wanted to start this session with an oldie but goodie, in terms of The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. And this is my tattered copy that I've been using for many years in the classroom. And it's this is, I think, the third version, because I've had to use different versions because it's fallen apart throughout the years. So anyway, this novel, written by F. Scott Fitzgerald, published in 1925, is it takes place during the roaring 20s, the booming 20s, and going into the Great Depression. Like Fitzgerald kind of like signals the Great Depression when he gives us this character, Nick Carraway, being the Bond man that he is. So, and looking at the characters from the novel, we see our main character, our narrator, our unreliable narrator, if you will, writing from a third person, omniscient, second person, first person. So he also, exchanges with the reader, which is something that adds a level of complexity to the novel, much like what Charlotte Bronte does in Jane Eyre. Okay, maybe not to that extent, but we certainly see our unreliable narrator Nick giving us his insight to our characters, Tom Buchanan, Daisy Buchanan, George Wilson, Myrtle Wilson, and of course James Gatz, or Jay Gatsby. So we see Nick from the get-go, from the start of chapter 1, giving us, he opens the novel with the advice that his father has given him, and kind of reveals right away his level of privilege, his status as being, somebody who hasn't gone without. Okay, so he tells us, in my younger and more vulnerable years, my father gave me some advice that have been turning over in my head, in my mind ever since. So this is probably the most famous quote of the novel. This is our first paragraph, and he tells us, whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, he told me, just remember that all people in this world haven't had the advantages that you've had. So right away he tells us that he's had advantages. Okay, so and then he tries, this is his humble brag, if you will. He tells us that he's been accused of being a politician, which, in other words, he's kind of a hypocrite. He says these things in an interesting way, to not shed a negative light, and keeping it more of like an objective, but there is this undertone of negativity that's tied to it, and we see the way that he describes Tom Buchanan right at the beginning. Tells us, that he is arrogant. He tells us that he is supercilious. All of these things, and then we see that the judgment is definitely not reserved. If anything, the book is centered on this idea of judgment, and the way that Nick is unable to really kind of put his finger on who he is as a character. He's very reluctant to kind of like tell us his story. I mean, he tells us his story, but it's not authentic. It's not his authentic self. He's very much embroiled in conflict. Okay, so he tells us here, and after he tells us about the reserving judgment, then he gets into the idea that he needed to go out east. He did for school. He went to Yale, right? And then he graduates from Yale, and then he goes to World War I, comes back from war, back to the Middle West where he's from, and he says here, I graduated from New Haven in 1915, just a quarter of a century after my father, and a little after I participated in that delayed Teutonic migration known as the Great War. I enjoyed the counter raid so thoroughly that I came back restless. Instead of being the warm center of the world, the Middle West now seemed like the ragged edge of the universe. So I decided to go east and learn the bond business. So he was unsettled, restless, maybe suffering from PTSD, not maybe, definitely suffering from shell shock or some level of PTSD. And so to kind of like put that at bay, he decided that he wanted to have more excitement in his life, so he wants to go back out east. Okay, he says here, everybody I knew was in the bond business, so I supposed it could support one more single man. All my aunts and uncles talked it over as if they were choosing a prep school for me, and finally said, why, yes, with very grave, hesitant faces. Father agreed to finance me for a year, and after various delays, I came east permanently, I thought, in the spring of 22. So right from the beginning of the book, we know that he didn't stay out east. We know that he came back to his house. And why not? I mean, he certainly has a lot of comfort from his family in the Middle West, even though he wants to get away from them. He has a safety net, and his father is willing to finance him for a year. How nice, right? So again, that tells you this level of comfort, this level of privilege that Nick comes from. Also, the inability for him to make decisions, this reluctance, or maybe, I don't know, just he would rather somebody else do it, or kind of force him into it. He has this ambivalence about him by doing anything. So, and it's interesting the way that Fitzgerald wrote it, that he says the bond business, right, it could support one more single man. So perhaps the upshot is that Nick Carraway is that the straw that broke the camel's back, in effect, and kind of signaled the downturn of the market and the bond business, which was very corrupt, in this time period. So we see from the beginning, right, and we also see the foreshadowing, their grave faces, their hesitant faces. So nobody thought it was a good idea, and yet he still did it. He also tells us that Gatsby turned out all right in the end. It is what preyed on Gatsby, what foul dust floated in the wake of his dreams, that temporarily closed out my interest in the abortive sorrows and short-winded elations of men. So, abortive sorrows and short-winded elations. So, really, really sad, really pessimistic view. We also see this link that Fitzgerald is drawing to T.S. Eliot and the Wasteland in terms of the dust, and then we see that in the in chapter 3 where he talks about the in terms of where George Wilson and Myrtle Wilson live. We talk about it's chapter 2, the Valley of Ashes, where George Wilson and Myrtle Wilson live. And the Valley of Ashes, interestingly enough, is where you have to go in order for you to get to New York City. So we're dealing with, the reality is the Valley of Ashes, and this extraordinary virtual reality is in Long Island, right? And these eggs that he describes as eggs. So that's where Nick is living in the less fashionable egg, and he and West Egg, East Egg. So they're not even fully on the eastern seaboard, right? They're on an island that's adjacent to the East Coast. So they're all transplants in the novel, right? Nick Carraway is from the Middle West. Tom Buchanan's from Chicago. Daisy Buchanan is from Kentucky, and Gatsby is also from the Midwest or the Middle West or whatever he deems as the Midwest. I think later on we find out that he's from California, and I think that's like considered the West. It's not middle of nothing. So all of these, the point here is all of these characters within the novel are transplants. They all are outcasts. They all are trying to gain acceptance in this very blue blood, very snobbish area in the United States of America at the time. Okay, so we also have this notion of a single man, right? In Nick Carraway, a single dream in Gatsby, right? He says here, Nick says, I wrote a series of very solemn and obvious editorials in the Yale News, and now I was going to bring back all such things into my life and become again that most limited of all specialists, the well-rounded man. This isn't just an epigram. Life is much more successfully looked at from a single window, after all. And so it's interesting, this take of the Renaissance man, or the old adage is that if you are a jack of all trades, you are a master of none. In terms of like what Nick Carraway is setting out to do, he is setting out to make a conscious effort to be that jack of all trades and master of none. So perhaps he won't even be a master at the bond business. Okay, so he's kind of like admitting all of this right now. His idols, or his models, if you will, are Midas and Morgan and Maecenas. Okay, so I mean we have this hubris that Nick has, underneath it all. He says there was so much to read, for one thing, and so much fine health to be pulled down out of the young breath-giving air. So again, more conflict within the novel that Fitzgerald builds, not only within the characters, but also within the setting and the plot. We have, it's the summertime in New York, summertime in this very lavish, gorgeous area. And so he's expecting that he's going to be able to lock himself away and become an expert in the bond business, and yet we have all these distractions. Okay, notice he looks at the money. I mean, not the money. He looks at the books, right? I bought a dozen volumes on banking and credit and investment securities, and they stood on my shelf in red and gold like new money from the mint, as if they were just going to, by osmosis, like enter his brain, and he would become this expert in the bond business. So like new money minted from the new money from the mint, promising to unfold the shining secrets that only Midas and Morgan and Maecenas knew. And then we have this next sentence that kind of like tells us all we need to know. And I had the high intention of reading many other books besides. And then that's where we get him talking about, you know, being a writer for the Yale News, and not such a great writer. Anyway, so anyway, then we get into this discussion of the eggs, you know, the West egg and the East egg, and how they don't look, they look similar, but only if you're you know, he says to the wingless, a more arresting phenomenon is their dissimilarity in every particular except shape and size. So besides the shape and size, everything about them interior wise is different. Okay, and so like image over substance is kind of like the discussion here. Is there any substance to our characters? I mean, there may be for Nick, but Nick is reluctant to kind of like tell us what they are, what his substance is. He might be substantive, you know, but there's not much there. And so the limiting characters that we have here, Tom Buchanan, very shallow, superficial, and we have Gatsby also. He kind of like shrouds himself in mystery and is very much guarded to everybody except Daisy, and we'll see that as we go. So then we have this, you know, he's living at West Egg, and he just so happens to live next to Gatsby's house, and he describes his house as an eyesore. He says here, I lived at West Egg, the less fashionable of the two, though this is a most superficial tag to express the bizarre and not little sinister contrast between them. So, I mean, right there, he kind of like identifies that it is superficial. He identifies himself as being superficial, and perhaps society itself, okay, as being superficial. And here we go, you know, he's going to tell us why. He says here, to express the bizarre and not a little sinister contrast between them. My house was at the very tip of the egg, only 50 yards from the Sound, and squeezed between two huge places that rented for 12 or 15,000 a season. The one on my right was a colossal affair by any standard. It was a factual imitation of some Hotel de Ville in Normandy, with a tower on one side, spanking new under a thin beard of raw ivy, and a marble swimming pool, and more than 40 acres of lawn and garden. It was Gatsby's mansion, or rather, as I didn't know Mr. Gatsby, it was a mansion inhabited by a gentleman of that name. My own house was an eyesore, but it was a small eyesore, and it had been overlooked, so I had a view of the water, a partial view of my neighbor's lawn, and the consoling proximity of millionaires, all for $80 a month. So again, this is kind of more of Nick telling us that he's superficial. He is there for the gossip. He's there for the tea, all of it. He wants all of it to be spilt, and he's going to be there to document it. So it's interesting. The consoling proximity of millionaires. Again, maybe this is truth, you know, in terms of Nick revealing that he himself may never be this millionaire. However, he's going to be near them, and that's going to make him feel better about himself. Which is, I mean, sad in a way. Certainly a sad statement. He also says that there's a sinister contrast between the two eggs, West Egg and East Egg. So, I mean, that's kind of interesting, puzzling at the same time. Fitzgerald building on this notion, this foreshadowing in terms of, like, what happened? Why did Nick end up going back to the Midwest? Why didn't this work out? What's going on here with Gatsby? What is sinister? Okay. Also, we then have him telling us that he's going to go and see his friends that he scarcely knew at all, which again reveals insight into Nick and his inability to have maybe intimate relationships. The kind of like the intro to it. And he's very guarded, like I said, and we kind of are revealed certain things slowly but surely as the novel progresses. So anyway, the admiration he has is interesting too, regarding Tom Buchanan, and then the admiration that he has for Gatsby is also interesting in terms of the morality within the novel. Morally, is Nick a moral person, or is he amoral? You know, that's always a conversation that I have in class specifically. Is Nick a good character? Does that matter? Does that matter? You know, and then we have the movie interpretations of the book. We have Robert Redford as Gatsby, you know, and then we have Leonardo DiCaprio as Gatsby. So why is it that we have these very handsome, charismatic men who are playing the role of this monster, quote unquote? This man that is, you know, he's involved with the mob. He's making alcohol, selling alcohol in the time of prohibition. He's, you know, making money on the backs of, you know, lying to people, you know, just misrepresenting himself, and perhaps also, you know, adding to the distrust of the banking institutions of the day. So there's a lot of things going on here, and then we have Nick, who is in the middle of this, and you know, the next thing that we find out that's kind of like morally questionable here is, you know, his cousin is Daisy, and yet we have Tom going up to Nick and telling him, "I want you to meet my girl." And you know, as the reader, we're looking in this book and we're like, yeah, his girl would be, you know, Daisy, but that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about this extramarital affair that he's having with Myrtle Wilson, and she's very poor, and Daisy's very wealthy, and we have this kind of like a habitual this habitual pattern that Tom Buchanan has, and we find that out as the novel progresses. Okay, so again, this I'm gonna stop now, and we'll pick it up next time. But you know, this is my intro to the YouTube space, and trying to push forth this new idea, this new channel, Lance Lit and Learn. And hopefully we, not hopefully, but the plan is for us to discuss novels, literature in general, and just to, you know, perhaps you have comments you want to suggest in the comment section, your take on the literature, your take on the novel, and you know, we'll have discussions, get into some interesting ideas here. And I like this space in terms of it being an assistant, you know, in terms of breaking down a novel. With certainly with the introduction to AI, you know, I see a lot of people, you know, resorting to, you know, asking a chatbot to explain a piece of literature, to break down a certain character or plot. Also, maybe in fact, write, you know, asking a chatbot to write an analysis for them. And I see that it's limited. I mean, it'll do it, but it won't have like a lot of breadth. It won't be it won't be a deep understanding of the piece. And there's a lot of nuances, especially with The Great Gatsby, as I've looked at it throughout the years. And so perhaps this is a space, this is an opportunity to actually get in there, you know, and kind of like unpack those ideas. So that's my goal for this channel, and I'd like your support. So you know, like, subscribe, and share. Okay, thank you.